folks, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now, chicken soup. This video is going to be about chicken soup, and in particular it's going to be about chicken soup and how chicken soup may be able to improve immunity and may be a treatment for upper respiratory tract infections. Now we're coming up to cold season here in the United Kingdom, in the Northern Hemisphere. It's starting to get darker at night. The strength of the sun's starting to go down, and this is the time of year when generally people start to get colds. And this, I think, relates mainly to reductions in vitamin D production in people's skin. And one of my recommendations is always to make sure during the winter that you take your vitamin D. I've got plenty of videos on vitamin D, so I don't want to go into that in detail in this video. However, once you've got a cold, what can you do to decrease the severity of the symptoms and the duration of that cold? Well, some other things you can do. Zinc has also been investigated and shown, zinc lozenges in particular have been shown to decrease the severity of the symptoms of a cold and actually decrease the duration you may have that cold. And high levels of vitamin C have also shown to be helpful. So there's some basic recommendations: vitamin D, zinc and vitamin C. But chicken soup is very interesting because it seems to have some of these same properties, and in particular there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that chicken soup is able to decrease the severity of the symptoms and also decrease the length of time you may have an upper respiratory tract infection such as a common cold. Now, chicken soup is referred to anecdotally as Jewish penicillin for this reason, because it has these immune enhancing properties, these anecdotal immune enhancing properties. But I wanted to have a look at this from a scientific point of view to see if there is any evidence in the scientific literature as to whether chicken soup is actually beneficial. And I came across a couple of studies. There are others, but these are two that I found particularly interesting. And as always, I'll put the link to these studies in the comments box below this video so you can check them out yourself. Now, the first study looked at the consumption of chicken soup and compared the consumption of chicken soup to hot water, cold water, and also through a kind of a sham drinking process, so to see if it was actually the consumption that caused the changes. So these processes were all compared, and what the researchers found was that it's not surprising that hot water and hot soup were actually more beneficial at decreasing, decongesting the potentially decongesting the subjects, and they measured this by the flow of nasal mucus. So compared to cold water, hot soup and hot water increased the flow of nasal mucus, and this could be inferred that had a decongestant effect on the subjects. Now, obviously, if you have a cold, you're blocked up, you're bunged up. If you can increase the flow of nasal mucus, that could be a way of relieving some of the discomforting symptoms that you get from a cold. So it was no surprising really that hot liquids are better than cold liquids. But what they actually then did is they tested the hot liquids, either consumption in a normal way, so that would be sipping, the soup or the hot water, or taking the hot liquid through a straw. And what they found, particularly with the chicken soup, was that when the chicken soup was consumed in a more traditional way of sipping the soup, perhaps from a spoon, there was actually an increase in the flow of nasal mucus compared with taking it through a straw. So this would indicate that something in the chicken soup, some kind of aroma, or the smell of the chicken soup, or maybe even the taste may be altered by the way you consume it. It may have an effect on the flow of nasal mucus. So this, I thought this study was quite interesting because it does show that possibly what people know is that hot foods when you have a cold are comforting. Hot foods may actually decrease the symptoms of the cold. And there is a physical mechanism by by where this may happen. The taste buds in the mouth are linked to the brain, and the brain obviously has control over various aspects of your olfactory processes, and this can include the flow of mucus. So there is a mechanism by which this could happen, and I've often said that hot foods are very comforting. I always refer to tea. Tea is a very comforting drink. If you're stressed, if you're maybe you're anxious, I've always found that a hot cup of tea, there's nothing that can't be solved by having a nice hot cup of tea. So this is one of the mechanisms by which hot chicken soup may be beneficial, and this is a kind of a this is not relating to your immunity. This is relating more perhaps to the taste of the soup and the warmth of the soup. But does chicken soup actually have a potential effect on your immune system? Can it actually in some way alter your immunity and therefore decrease the length of time you may have a cold, and also the severity of the symptoms? And I came across another paper that looked at the amino acid content of various meats and how the amino acid content of the meats changes over time. And it compared 3 meats. It compared beef to pork to chicken. And this paper contains information on the amount of free amino acids in these meats. Generally, what happens when an animal is slaughtered, the content of the meat at time point 0 has a high protein content. Now, proteins are long chains of amino acids, and that would be the flesh of the animal. That would be the skeletal muscle of the animal. What happens over time is that the proteins break down to smaller peptides and ultimately to free amino acids. And so what happens is, as you store meat, the free amino acid content of the meat increases. Now, this has one interesting property in that it changes the taste of the meat. Free amino acids have particular taste properties depending on the amino acid, and therefore stored meat has a different taste. It's often referred to as increasing its brothiness. The broth taste of the meat increases over time as you store it, and that's relating largely to the breakdown of the protein to free amino acids. Now, what this paper was interesting because of all the 3 meats that were investigated, chicken had the highest content of glutamine, of free amino acid glutamine. So it had a significant portion more glutamine than beef and pork. But what happened over time as the meat was stored is that the free glutamine content of the chicken increased even further. So stored beef and pork had a lower glutamine free amino acid content than chicken. Now, how this might relate to immunity is quite interesting, because glutamine is an amino acid that is required by the immune system. There are immune cells in the immune system that require glutamine as a source of fuel, and they use this to be able to undergo their function. So the proliferation of lymphocytes are white blood cells, requires a certain level of free glutamine in the blood. They require glutamine to be able to undergo this process. The phagocytic process of macrophages is also reliant on glutamine. If you have low levels of glutamine in your blood, in your plasma, this can have an immunosuppressing effect, because these lymphocytes and these macrophages don't have enough glutamine, and therefore the lymphocytes cease their proliferation. In other words, the amount of lymphocytes in your blood will decrease, and the macrophages, which are really there to consume foreign objects through this phagocytic process, they won't be able to undergo that process because of a lack of glutamine. Now, because chicken obviously has high amounts of glutamine, it's a meat that's known to have high amounts of glutamine in it, and as you store the meat, the glutamine content increases. This would suggest that chicken soup, which has obviously got stored chicken in it, the chicken has been, it's fairly long time since it was present in an animal. This may indicate that one of the mechanisms whereby chicken soup could be beneficial to the treatment of upper respiratory tract infections could be because of the glutamine content. So there are actually reasons that have been explained, and there are mechanisms that are obtainable from the scientific literature, as to why chicken soup may be beneficial at preventing colds. If you're going to use chicken soup, if you have a cold and you're going to use chicken soup, what else could you add to it? Well, it's very interesting that there are a number of vegetables that also contain high amounts of glutamine. Cabbage is one, there's parsley contains high amounts of glutamine, and also spinach. So these are the sort of things that you could put in a soup. You could make a chicken and vegetable soup, and this would have high amounts of glutamine, and that may have beneficial effects on your immune system. Of course, you could take a glutamine supplement, and that would also have an ability to raise the plasma levels of glutamine, and that might have immune enhancing effects as well. So chicken soup, yes, there are scientific reasons why it could actually be beneficial at treating and preventing colds, and therefore, you know, the anecdotal stories, its name as Jewish penicillin, you know, there is quite often we do find that these nutritional anecdotal stories do eventually, the scientists do eventually catch up, and they do eventually find mechanisms by where many of these foods do have beneficial effects on our health. So I hope you found that interesting. If you do get a cold, I would recommend trying chicken soup. And as always, eat well, stay healthy, and protect yourself. And I will see you soon for another video. Take care.